What are we so afraid of? That's the question I want to ask tonight. Let me start with a story. A couple weeks ago, I was at Buffalo Wild Wings with a few buddies of mine. And one of my friends walked in a little bit late. We're watching sports or something. I don't remember what we're doing, to be honest with you. And he realizes, he has this sinking feeling, he realizes that he left his door locked at his house and no one was home. Now, he lived in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods. He lives in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Saginaw Township area. We'd all view it as a safe, pristine neighborhood. But I could tell as he sat there, he was totally not relaxed. When he couldn't take it anymore, he got up, drove all the way back, 15 minutes to his house, locked the door, drove back to Buffalo Wild Wings, and spent the next hour or so with us. Just want to ask a simple question. Was his fear so warranted in your mind that he needed to get up that minute and go home and lock that door? Let me tell you another story. When I was in my early 20s, newly married, my wife and I decided to move into, by our terminology at that time, the hood in Des Moines, Iowa. We decided to move into a rough neighborhood. I grew up in a pretty wealthy family, as did my wife. And so we moved into this neighborhood. It looked scary to us, but I wanted to have a little bit of adventure in my life. So we bought an old house that the stray cats were living in and urinating in, actually. In fact, so much so that when I first walked into that house, I still remember it, thinking of buying it. It reeked so much of cat urine, I literally almost threw up. But we bought it anyway. To make a long story short, we spent 3 years remodeling that house and turned it into a home. And when we moved in, what I was amazed by is all of our friends and family, some of our family were supportive, some of our friends were supportive of the idea, but most people said, "You're crazy for moving into the inner city. I would never move into an environment like that." I'm using the terms that we used to use then. Okay? And furthermore, I even got worse things said to me, like, "You're an irresponsible father, moving your wife and children into a neighborhood like that, when you can afford and have the means to live in a better, safer neighborhood." Well, I'm a stubborn person, so I just kept going. We ended up living in that house for 5 years. We lived in an apartment 2 years before that in the same neighborhood. That neighborhood was characterized by drug deals. There were prostitutes on my street. People didn't mow their lawns. You know the drill. It's a typical inner city neighborhood in the United States. But I'll tell you what, that decision I made when I was roughly 23, 24 years old is one of the best decisions I've ever made in terms of framing my character, my outlook on the world, my outlook on life. Let me tell you one story of something that happened there. We lived next door to a guy named David Hyde. He was a mentally disabled adult. He lived with his 52-year-old mother. She suddenly died of complications due to diabetes and obesity. And because he was mentally disabled, he had nowhere to go. And we decided to take him in because we had a relationship with him. And he lived with us for a time. And I'll tell you what, in that experience, that was one of the hardest experiences of my life. Having a guy that came from poverty, who was mentally disabled, had never seen his family work before, live with me, and have to live under my rules in our house. It changed me a heck of a lot more than it changed him. It taught me about compassion. It taught me about the stories that people have that I've never heard before. It taught me about the entitlement I had for my wealth. It taught me about wealth in general. And it taught me about fear and risk. I had so many great experiences. I had some funny experiences in that neighborhood too. Like for example, a guy stole my grill one time off my front yard, and I was on a walk one day and I saw it on his porch and I stole it back. So that's kind of an exciting story. I had an 11-year-old steal my moped. Yes, a guy my size can ride a moped. And I still have a scooter to this day. But I rode that moped around, and I had an 11-year-old kid steal it, and I caught him about a week or so later trying to start it about 3 blocks away. I got caught between a Vietnam vet and his heroin dealer in a brawl one time. So I had some really interesting experiences that really changed me and changed my view of the world and opened my eyes to different stories and opened my eyes to things like compassion and to courage. So I was affected more by that environment than I affected it, for sure. So I want to ask the question, was I an irresponsible father for moving my family into that neighborhood when I had the means to live in a better or safe neighborhood. Let's take a look at a definition of fear or risk here. This is Webster's dictionary. The possibility that something bad or unpleasant will happen. You guys realize that we're in a situation of risk right now? I could break my leg walking across here right by accident, step funny on it. Something bad can always happen. The question is, are we in a situation of low risk or high risk, right? Or mid-risk or somewhere in between. Okay? I would view this is a different scenario. This is called imminent peril. Imminent peril is not just when I'm in a situation of risk, but when danger is at hand. Like something's happening right now where my life is at risk. It's menacingly close and at hand and threatening. Okay? I would view this as a high-risk endeavor. Especially since I'm afraid of heights. So that's a high-risk endeavor. For the person there, maybe not so high risk because he's skilled. Okay? I would view this as imminent peril. If I were to release this into the room right now, a hungry, angry bear, we would all be running for our lives, wouldn't we? That's imminent peril. And see, I came to realize through my experience in inner city Des Moines and some trips I took to Honduras and China in areas that were more challenging and had a lot more needs than I was used to, that a lot of times our assessment of risk is way off. Kind of like my friend at B-Dubs. See, my friend at B-Dubs was realistically in a position of low risk, wasn't he? I mean, what do you think the probability is in a 3-hour span on a Tuesday night that my friend in a wealthy neighborhood at Saginaw Township was going to have his house robbed while he was away? Super low probability by the crime statistics in the neighborhood, correct? But he had a feeling of what? Imminent peril. If I don't leave now, my house is going to get broken into. I better go right now and come back. So the perceived risk can be a heck of a lot different than the actual risk. Okay? This is a graph of violent crime in the United States. There's a guy by the name of Mark War. He wrote an article called Fear of Crime in the United States. And he talks about how the fear of crime has gone drastically down, or drastically up rather, but crime itself has gone drastically down. And he tries to reconcile this. He's a sociologist at UT Austin. He tries to reconcile this idea. Why are people so afraid when the actual risk of crime is going down? Okay? So here, I download this from the FBI website. You can get all the data on crime for the last 80 years from the FBI website. This is the violent crime starting at my year of birth to now. And notice, it's lower than it's ever been since I was born. Okay? Now I want you guys to know that when I was a kid, you guys would probably say the same thing, my mom and dad, when I was 9 or 10 years, allowed me to free range around the city I lived in on my bike. I could ride anywhere with my friends. I'm not aware literally of any family that allow their 9 or 10-year-old to ride around for fear of kidnapping, abuse, violence, something of that nature. So the perception of fear has increased. Check out murders. Lower than they've ever been in my lifetime. Okay, reported murders. Check out property crime. Lower than it's ever been in my lifetime. Okay? Well, Mark War asked this question: how much fear is justified or appropriate? Fear is justified when perceived risk is congruent with objective risk. He makes a distinction between when we feel like something's risky versus when it's actually risky, as supported by data and by actual information. So what are the fear factors? He goes on in this article, and I love this article because it really illuminates a lot of things I've been thinking over the last decade. He illuminates a lot of the factors that make Americans generally afraid of things that are not necessarily related to an actual risk, but are related to other factors that are not correlated to actual risk. And here's some of them. First one's obvious. People are more afraid at night than they are during the day, right? Generally speaking, even though 85% of crime happens during the day, by the way. Okay? Next, environmental novelty. That means the newness of the environment. People are often generally afraid of environments that are new to them. Could be a new country, a new city, a new cityscape, a new landscape, a new race, a new socioeconomic class. We're afraid of things we're not familiar with. This one I'm most interested in. Signs of incivility. This would be things like graffiti, trash on the road, abandoned homes, homeless people walking around. Okay? These things make people inherently afraid. Second, media representation of crime, guys. Taken is extremely unlikely. And yet about every month we have a movie like Taken, don't we? As if you're a woman, you're probably going to at some point have to run from being stolen into sex slavery. Okay? And then add that to all the nightly crime dramas with all kinds of just people going about their everyday business, having horrible things happen to them. Add in the fact that our news is always talking about violence, corruption in politics. It's always talking about theft, robbery, death, crime, natural disasters. Don't forget also the selling of fear. We have so many products. Insurance. NerdWallet estimates that 13% of the average American income is devoted to insuring themselves and their stuff, compared to an international average of less than 1%. We insure so much stuff. We have security devices for almost everything. Every product that humans interact with is advertised as having various safety precautions built into it. Whether it be a knife, a table saw, or anything else we interact with, or playground equipment at your kid's park. So all these factors increase our perception of the risk of our environment. What's the problem with this? Well, here's one problem with it. Most of the world has all those factors. You guys are aware that 2/3 or more of the world is in poverty. Signs of incivility, from an American perspective, are everywhere. Not only in our own country and in our own cities, but abroad. The media representation of crime, the media represents other countries in really, really dastardly ways, especially developing countries. So what this does is this often gets us to be completely afraid of doing things that should be normal human activity. Okay? Great example. I think a lot of us would like the world to be like Disney World, where everything's pretty and pristine and everyone's dressed nice and there's no litter and there's no graffiti and everybody's smiling and there's ice cream everywhere. We'd like the whole world to be that way. But that's not how the world is. And so what can fear keep us from? Simple. It can keep us from getting around people who are different from us, with different cultures, from different socioeconomic classes, with different struggles, with different environments, with different risks than we're used to. It can keep us from loving people and having compassion and understanding people's stories and hearing people's stories. There's benefits both for us, but there's also benefits that we can bring to many of these environments with the gifts and talents we've been given. We become isolated in a bubble. And we create an isolated life, fear of any perceived risk. And we think irrationally about what's actually risky. I'll leave you with this quote. Greatness is often associated with passion, resilience, courage, a sensible relationship with risk, and a willingness to endure some greater risk for a greater good. Be aware, folks, and this is a meditation I have regularly, that there are people now that exist in the world and have existed throughout history who have not only decided to shun irrational fear, but to embrace greater risk for a greater good. And to get around people and show love and compassion and enact justice. Think of the people who were in Nazi Germany, who were hiding Jews or other minorities, and the imminent danger they put themselves in. Think of the people in our own civil rights movement, who put themselves at great risk in order to pursue a greater good. So my exhortation to myself, to all of us, be sensible and be courageous. Do weird stuff. Go weird places. Don't write off whole parts of the world because of what you're hearing from the media and what you're watching on television. And don't even write off whole parts of our cities and our urban centers and the people there for the same reason. Thank you.